What an awesome time of worship. I don't know if I'm alone in that, but that was great. Thank you, worship team, for everything you guys do for us every week. Please open your paper Bible to Judges chapter 14. If you have a digital Bible, that also will work, but definitely recommend the paper Bible because then you don't get any notifications from Facebook saying some crazy new headline happened during this. We're continuing this week in our series called Flannelgraph. We're ready for another Bible story, straight from kids' church. We're revisiting old children's church tales as adults to hopefully adjust our view of these stories to be more aligned with the Bible's mature intent. So last week we examined Jonah, who's a great prophet, right? Wonderful example of character, and no, he was not. He was pretty rough. But we saw last week that his heart was bent towards bitterness, even towards a God that would dare to show compassion to his enemies. And we learned that the book actually asks us the same question: should God have mercy on the people that I despise? And of course, we came to the conclusion, no, God should not despise these people. And if we claim to love God, then we too should love others. Very difficult message to deliver. I hope it was well received. Jonah was completely blind to the ways that God had been compassionate to him and instead expected the full measure of justice for his enemies. But let's admit, when we were kids and I was growing up in kids' church, the only reason I knew Jonah was because of the whale, right? It was because of the fish. Like, really, the story was about the fish. It wasn't so much about the prophet. It was about the fish. That was way more cool, right? Well, this week, we're going to look at a character who there's no fish involved. I just really liked this guy, right? And of course, I'm thinking of Samson, right? Absolutely jacked, ripped, rippling abs in the Middle Eastern sun, like just the biblical example of a superhero, right? Like as a kid, I adored Samson, thought he was the coolest guy ever because he was so strong. In fact, I remember sitting in kids' church with a coloring page looking at Samson with his like luscious locks and like his donkey jawbone and thinking he was the coolest guy in the Bible. In fact, I kind of thought of him like a superhero, like he was one who had super strength, like almost otherworldly strength, right? He could create riddles and then solve them. He even fought for truth, justice, and the Israeli way, right? Who am I thinking of? The superhero, right? Who am I thinking of? Batman, obviously, yeah. So, like, any other Batman fans in here? Yes? Oh, one person likes Batman. Wow, I'm glad to see that nobody's honest. Batman is awesome. I know he's kind of fallen on hard times recently, but Lego Batman was really good. The best Batman movie, by far, and one of the best films ever made, is called The Dark Knight. Can anyone agree with me on that? Can I get an amen? Woo! The Dark Knight, so good. And actually, the plot of the film is actually really relevant to what we're talking about today. So if you'll indulge me for just a second, I'm going to go through one character in this film, his story, and see how it really applies to Jonah. So throughout the film, there's this tension in Gotham City, where it's set, regarding organized crime and corruption in their government, right? Now, a new politician is on the rise, and his name is Harvey Dent, right? And he is honest, he's upright, he's not like any other politician. He actually is like, he's going for justice. He's actually calling these criminals to account and is arresting them for their crimes. Now, Bruce Wayne, Batman, believes that Gotham can only ever heal through legitimate means. They need a leader who will not get his hands dirty in order to solve problems, right? And he believes that Harvey is the solution. But unfortunately, as the film goes on, the wiles of the Joker and threatening all the things that Harvey cares about leads him to break. He goes insane, and he goes on a killing spree at the end of the film. Ultimately, he dies a criminal, but the circumstances of his death are then covered up. So only a select few people know the truth, but in the eyes of the public, he's a martyr, right? So we, the audience, know he really was corrupt, but Gotham thinks he was an upright politician. Harvey was not the hero that Gotham needed. He was the hero they deserved. They deserved a corrupt politician. They needed someone upright who could overcome evil with good, but instead what they got was another corrupt leader who gave in to his own desires. A really poignant line from the film was, "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." The natural order of human psychology is to look up to others. This is something we all do. We admire someone like Batman for his character and his morality. We admire Sherlock Holmes for his cunning. Even outside of fictional characters, we admire figures of history like Abraham Lincoln or Rosa Parks, who just stand up to evil in the face of it. We admire the parents, the teachers, the leaders, the creatives of our time, those known popularly by the whole culture, and those even within our own circles. We admire people. It's normal for us to do that. Yet at some point, reality sinks in. All the people that we look up to in one way or another are sinful, and they let us down. Sometimes in colossal ways. Even though I admired Samson as a child, as I grew up and reread his story, I quickly became disgusted by him. And as we explore a couple of the chapters of Judges, I'd love for us to keep these ideas in mind, that Samson was seen as a hero, but he was the hero that the people of Israel at the time, he was the hero they deserved. He was a corrupt and wicked ruler. And today I'd like to demonstrate that even though he had righteous abs, Samson was not a hero. He never was meant to be. In fact, he lived long enough to see himself become the villain. So my name is Brenton. I'm a part of the teaching team here. If you're new, welcome to New Heart. We're so glad to have you here. We like the Bible, and we especially like what the Bible is pointing to the whole time, Jesus of Nazareth, the greatest man to ever live. And so if you are with us in that, we're going to explore the story of Samson and see how we can learn from it. And hopefully it'll point us more and more towards the direction of looking like Jesus. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we hop into the passage, we must first look at Samson's childhood. Now, before Samson was even born, an angel appeared to his parents and informed him that the baby in his mother's womb would be special, set aside from birth to serve God. He was going to be a Nazarite from birth. Now, a Nazarite vow is not it's not related at all to Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. They're two totally different things. But a Nazarite vow was typically a voluntary vow that a man or woman could take to separate themselves out from the world and dedicate themselves more fully to God. Now, Samson was different. He didn't make this vow voluntarily. He actually was set apart from birth by God to be a Nazarite. This would qualify him more than any leader in Israel's history to lead the people well, both lead the people by hearing from God and then also represent the people to God. He was meant to be sort of like a priest leader. Right? Now, the Bible lays out the full requirements for such a vow in Numbers 6, 1 through 21, but we're not going to go through the whole passage. Basically, the standard parts of what it means to to take a Nazarite vow would be these three things. So, no alcohol, so you can't have any Aldi Margs, which is just a disaster. Secondly, you can't touch anything dead, human or animal, even family members. You can't touch any dead body. And lastly, you cannot cut your hair. All of these things were things that Samson was supposed to do his whole life. Now, I'm sure if you grew up in kids' church, you know where this is headed, right? But indulge me for a moment. After Samson was born, his parents informed him of what the angel said, of course, of his vow, and of his future destiny to be the judge of Israel. And they must have also informed him that he would be the one that would begin the salvation of Israel from their enemies at the time, the Philistines, right? Which I imagine would be a lot of pressure to put on a small child, right? You never get to have a haircut. So no great clips for you. You never get to have any alcohol, which, I mean, you wouldn't get it until you're 21 anyway, so that's fine. But you can't touch anything dead. So you can't be that kid out in the park who's ripping frogs apart or, like, burning ants. You can't touch anything dead. So he can't be a normal boy. Now, I know it's pretty early on in the story. We're only him as a child, but unfortunately, this is the high point of the story. Everything else we're going to read from here, it just gets worse and worse and worse for Samson. Now, forgive me, because I have to compress like 4 chapters of Judges into like 10 minutes, so we're going to go really quick. But my wife informed me last week that I was way too fast last week, so I'm also going to try to be really slow as we work through really quickly the story of Samson. So here we go. Judges chapter 14, 1 through 3. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife." But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." Well, that's a big problem right off the bat. This is the first time we're hearing from Samson's mouth what his desires are, and we already have lots of red flags. Firstly, Samson is fraternizing with the Philistines. The people that he's supposed to be delivering Israel from, he's sort of like, I'm kind of okay with at least this one. Secondly, he's living a sinful lifestyle. And we get this from his phrase, she's right in my eyes. Now, if you've read the book of Judges, you're familiar with that phrase. It's been used throughout the book over and over and over again, basically to say the people don't care at all about what God's commandments were from Moses. They are just living life how they feel is right. They were doing what was right in their own eyes. By Samson using this phrase, he's indicating, I have no intention to follow what the Lord says. I'm going to do what I want. And what I want is that Philistine lady over there. This Nazarite from birth is showing the same proclivity to compromise and towards self-indulgence as the rest of his countrymen. And again, his story's only getting started. Thirdly, as the chapter continues, it seems that there is no attempt made at all for this woman to reject her Philistine heritage in order to join Israel. We see this in like a biblical hero like Ruth. She rejected her Moabite heritage in order to be identified with the people of God, with Israel, right? There is no indication whatsoever in this Judges passage that this woman intends to do the same. In fact, even after they're married, she remains in her father's household, and Samson has to go back to her land in order to see her from time to time. And Samson seems totally fine with this. He's like, I'm cool with this arrangement. That's totally all right with me. Now, while this whole debacle is happening, we continue to read, then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came towards him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. Again, we're seeing this phrase a second time. After some days, he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on, eating it as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave them some, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of a lion. More red flags. Not only is he hanging out in the vineyards, which you're not allowed to drink any alcohol, so you probably shouldn't even be around grapes. But secondly, he's slain a lion. Now, at first you might think, okay, it was self-defense, like he didn't have a choice. But what do you say about him scraping the honey out of the dead carcass? You could make the case, yeah, he was trying to defend himself, but there's no excuse for the second part. In the ancient Israel, something like honey would have been a very rare delicacy. You wouldn't pass up on that if you see it, especially if it's in a very easy-to-reach area. And so, of course, he's broken his vow now multiple times, but he doesn't tell his parents. And yet we still see that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him in order to help him during this, which is odd. Why would God be with him for this? Let's keep that tension in the back of our minds for a second, and then we'll continue to read. In Judges 14, and as he said to them, out of an eater came something sweet, out of the strong came something sweet. And in 3 days, they could not solve the riddle. Now, what this verse is talking about, Samson goes down to marry his bride, and at the wedding reception, he gives the Philistines a riddle. And he's like, hey, if you guys can't solve this riddle, you owe me a lot of money, right? And he gives them a riddle about a lion carcass with bees in it, something that he had just seen. And of course, they don't know what that means. They're like, what is happening? I have no idea what this is. In order to not lose the bet, the Philistines threatened Samson's wife to get the answer. And since she's still living among them and hasn't become an Israelite, they're able to actually take advantage of that. They threaten to burn her and her family alive unless she gets the answer from Samson, and eventually she does. Samson tells her the answer to the riddle, and then she runs off to them and tells them the answer. Now, Samson is obviously furious about this. He's been betrayed by this woman. So in order to pay his gambling debt, which is what it is, he bet them that they couldn't solve it. They solved it. So now he has to pay his gambling debt. So he goes to a neighboring Philistine city called Ashkelon, and he murders 30 men and takes all their stuff in order to pay his debt. He's not a hero, y'all. He's not a good dude. Samson is able to accomplish all this, the passage said, because the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. And again, why is God helping him? Let's just keep that tension. Now, given that Samson has acted thus far, we should be asking, like, why would God continue to be with him, even though he's broken his vow, actively defied God's mission, and now is behaving sinfully? Samson has murdered a bunch of Philistines. Samson's father-in-law annuls their wedding because of this, right? And he gives his daughter instead to Samson's best man. When Samson returns later to sleep with his wife, he finds out that she's already remarried to this other guy, and he is furious, fuming. So you know what he does? He decides to abuse some animals. He ties up some torches to some foxes' tails and lets them run free in the Philistines' grain fields in order to burn all of that down and, obviously, kill these animals. Now, this results in Samson's ex-wife and her whole family getting burned alive, and Philistines demanding Israel to hand Samson over to them. It's like, this man has killed 30 men in Ashkelon, he's burned down all of our crops for the year, give him to us. And Israel complies. They tie Samson up and they hand him over. But the Spirit of the Lord once again rushes upon Samson, and using the jawbone of a donkey, he slays 1,000 Philistine men, single-handedly. All of these issues came about because Samson broke his vow. He acted arrogantly and did what was right in his own eyes. And by using the jawbone of a donkey, he's now violated his Nazirite vow again by touching a dead body. He's touching the dead carcass of a donkey. And yet again, the Lord continues to stay with him. Now, it's as we enter chapter 16 that the story starts to get really good. 20 years have gone by since this moment. He's been the judge of Israel this whole time. So we open this chapter by reading that he goes to a Philistine city called Gaza and sleeps with a prostitute. So again, great guy, just a huge moral upstanding dude. After he escapes from this situation, like they find out, oh, this guy that we've been hunting for 20 years is in one of our cities. He escapes from that situation too, again, by the strength of God. And it says that he falls in love with a woman named Delilah, right? The text never indicates whether or not they were married, but it is absolutely implied that they lived together. Instead of threatening Samson's love interest this time, the Philistines decide to bribe Delilah. They're like, hey, this guy has beat us so many times over the past 20 years with this insane strength that he has. What is the source of his strength? How does he do this? And they pay Delilah in order to find out. Now, at first, Samson's able to ward her off, right? He says, if you tie me with new ropes, then I can't get free from that, and they're going to be able to take me, right? And so she tries that. She's like, oh, Samson, they're here to get you. And then he just snaps it like twigs, like twine, and he's fine. He's able to get through it. But eventually, she breaks him down, and he tells her the truth. He's like, I've never cut my hair in my life, and if my hair is cut, then my strength will leave me. And sure enough, he falls asleep, and while he sleeps, Delilah cuts all of his hair off. And this time, when the Philistines come to take him, the Spirit of the Lord has left him, and they're able to capture him. So let's review really quickly. Samson fraternized with the Philistines. He lived a sinful lifestyle. He gambles and pays his debt with murder and theft. He touched multiple dead bodies, violating his Nazirite vow. He slept with a prostitute. He killed thousands of Philistines. He has a live-in romantic partner whom he's not married to. He did what was right in his own eyes, and he revealed the secret to his strength and let his hair get cut. And can I add, he let the same thing happen twice. The first woman that he talked to about his riddle, he told her the answer. And now the second woman, he told her the source of his strength. So he's dumb. That's what I got to conclude. He's like, how did you not learn, bro? Finally, after all this mockery of the Lord and the Lord's plan for Samson's life, the Lord hands him over to the consequences of his actions, and he's captured by the Philistines. Now, the Philistines gouge out Samson's eyes, and they take him into captivity, but eventually Samson's hair grows back while he's in captivity. And one day, the Philistines bring Samson out in front of their guests in order to mock him, right? He's blind, he's tied up, there's nothing he can really do, they think. But Samson prays to God that he may receive back his strength to avenge his eyes, and he grabs two of the pillars in the temple and causes the temple to fall down on top of him and everyone inside, killing many Philistines and himself in the process. And that's the story of Samson. What a positive and encouraging message. Oh, just something so heartwarming for the whole family, right? No, obviously no. Like, it just leaves me scratching my head confused. Like, what is the point of this story? I thought Samson was supposed to be the good guy. I thought that we were supposed to be looking at this judge of Israel like he's going to save them. And he did? Why did God help him? In fact, why would God choose to work through such a messed up person? That's the question that I keep on coming back to over and over as I read this. Why would God help him? Why only leave him once he's cut his hair? Why not when he got his ex-wife killed? Or when he murdered 30 men to pay a gambling debt? Why not when he slew 1,000 men with a donkey jawbone, not a jonky jawbone, when he hired a prostitute? Why not when he broke his vow by hanging out in wine fields and eating honey out of a dead lion? Why would God wait until that moment to leave him? Why help him with this stuff? Here's what I think the answer to all these questions are. We've already said Samson's not a hero. He never was. But the point of this story is not to show that Samson was good, but that God can use anyone he chooses, even wildly wicked men, to achieve his purposes. Samson was not given power because he managed it well, or because his actions were righteous, or because he actually was secretly good in his heart. It just is outside. He's just kind of rough around the edges. No, he was given power entirely because of the providence of God. That's the only reason that he was given strength. The only reason that is given in Scripture as to why God had granted him this power was because God knew that God could use Samson, even in his arrogance, even with his faults, to save Israel from their oppressors. The lesson of Samson is this: God's goal is always to save his people, and he is willing to use the last person we expect to display his power. I don't know about you guys, that actually gives me a lot of hope for myself, because I see a lot of the wicked and the sad and the gross in me. And it actually makes me really happy that God could still use me to accomplish his good in this world. Even in the face of my rebellion, he can turn that to good. Maybe it'll look like a shameful, humiliating death like Samson, who got what he deserved. But it also resulted in the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. So maybe good doesn't look like good for me, but maybe it looks like good for God's people. Now, this is an especially hard truth for us to grasp today, and it's especially hard within the church. We have a tendency to elevate the men and the women who deliver the gospel message and not the God who gave us the message to deliver. We forget that these men and women are nothing but tools in the hand of a master builder, God, who is working with broken and marred tools, which is us, faulty equipment. We naturally elevate people within the church whom we respect for their insights, for their persona, for their skills. We respect them for their influence, and sometimes we're willing to admire them more than the God who empowered and equipped them with these skills, which makes it all the more painful when they fail us, all the more painful when they let us down. I know for a fact that I am guilty of this, and I can give you a tangible example. Back in 2019, even though I was raised in a Christian household, thanks guys, I really understood the gospel in 2019. It actually became real. It wasn't just what I had culturally grown up with. It actually was something that was like, oh, this affects every part of my life. This is not just something that I can have on the shelf alongside all the rest of who I am. No, it is the shelf on which all my life is built. That's when the Holy Spirit woke me up. I became obsessed with Jesus. I became obsessed with mesmerized with the truth of his diagnosis of the human condition and his solution to the evil in the world and in my own heart. And I couldn't get enough, so I did what any good millennial would do, and I popped on YouTube in order to see if anyone else felt the same way. And it turns out lots of people felt the same way that I did, which was just hungry, starving for spiritual truth. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I really felt that. I'm like, oh, I feed on you, and that's better than food. It's so cool when that happens to you. I really hope that you can say that that's been your experience with the scriptures as well. I was hungry for answers to tough questions. I was interested in defending the truth of God's word and in the resurrection of Jesus, which is what our whole faith rests on, right? And come to find out later that this is a whole wing of Christian research. It's called apologetics. And I found a bunch of YouTubers that are dedicated to talking about apologetics including one in particular who I owe most of the bulk of this sermon structure to, a guy named Inspiring Philosophy. But it's during those early years of my spiritual infancy, really, that I found a very famous speaker who became more influential to my walk than anyone else at that point. And his name was Ravi Zacharias. Now, I don't know if anyone in here knows that name, but if you don't, let me tell you his story really quick. Ravi was a very charismatic speaker and author and minister, and he would travel the world internationally hosting lectures and sermons which masterfully weaved together Christian truth with his own Indian heritage, with brilliant philosophical insight and humorous stories all together. He just tied it all together. It was so compelling. It was so good. And I devoured his videos. I read most of his books, and I loved Ravi. I felt like I owed a lot of my trust in Jesus to Ravi, more than I trusted Jesus. Sadly, in the spring of 2020, less than a year after I had learned who he was, he died. At the age of 74, he passed away from cancer. And of course, I was very saddened by this fact, but I figured that someday I would meet him in heaven when we all arrive there together at the new heavens and the new earth, when God comes to judge the living and the dead. I figured in the resurrection, I'll get to meet all the people of history whom I so admire for their faith in Jesus. I thought Ravi was going to be in that number. So think of my surprise when only a few months after his death, dozens of women start coming forward saying that Ravi sexually abused them and manipulated them and requested photos and just the most horrendous things that you can think of, that multiple dozens of women have come forward saying this about him. My hero. A formal investigation was conducted by the board of his ministry, RZIM, to confirm the legitimacy of these rumors. They hired a professional team that specializes in this kind of research in order to confirm whether or not these accusations were true. And after going through the evidence, going through his personal devices, going through the history and the timeline of his ministry, they found that it was all true. Ravi was secretly a predator who for decades used ministry funds to manipulate and groom young women. All of this was under the nose of his family and his ministry partners and all the Christians who admired him, and the church who propped him up as one of their leaders. Ravi came to us in sheep's clothing, but inwardly was a ravenous wolf. And anyone who knew me at the time, specifically Danielle and the Mizias, they knew I was devastated by this information, like just shook. How could this hero of mine, who I'd so respected, be in private, like just in utter rebellion against the God who he claimed to serve? To make matters worse, as if it couldn't already be bad, in 2014 from 2016, for about 2 years, a woman named Lorianne Thompson came forward with this information well before his death. And rather than admit that it was true, he got her to settle out of court a non-disclosure agreement, which then basically legally gagged her to the point where she couldn't disclose this information, and instead blackmailed her into being silent whilst completely destroying her character. He lied to everyone. In reality, the exact opposite had happened to what he claimed. He went on an interview with Christianity Today and claimed that she was trying to blackmail him, when in reality it was the exact opposite. She and her husband, who stayed with her this whole time, were shunned from their church. They lost almost all of their friends. They had to sell their house at a loss and move across country in order to get away from the stain of her reputation and hope that their new neighbors didn't know who she was. All the while praying that God would be just and try to remain faithful to him in the face of these overwhelming odds. And then obviously when the news broke in 2020, everything that Lorianne had been saying back in 2016 was true. And we totally wrote her off as a church because we didn't want to believe that one of our leaders could do that. I wish I could tell you that this was an uncommon story in the church. I wish I could tell you that this doesn't happen all the time. But the reality is this is not something that we can just push under the rug and ignore. Sin has devastating effects in our community, and we have to take holiness seriously. Even in the past few months, multiple big ministers have resigned their positions due to private life hypocrisy, sexual or otherwise, being exposed. And as awful and as ugly as these sins are, we can't just ignore them. Each one of us is tainted with sin. And we will never be free of it completely on this side of heaven. But to willingly accept sin into our hearts and into our lives is to spit in the face of what Jesus did for us. The wages of sin is death, and I don't just mean physical. I don't even just mean spiritual. I mean it's the taste of death in everything that you do. When you look upon Jesus, who is the source of life, and you say, nah, I'm good, I'd rather have this, you're rejecting life in favor of death. To elevate people is human, because to worship is to be human, as Danielle said. But brothers and sisters, let us never, ever elevate a speaker, a minister, a musician, a politician, an actor, a philanthropist, an influencer, or an evangelist over and above the name of all names. The only man worthy of your praise is Jesus, God in human flesh. Samson is a bleak reminder that no one, even those with a divine calling from God, are worthy of our worship. But he also stands as a reminder that God's plans will be fulfilled. God's sovereignty is not challenged in our corrupt and broken world. When Jesus prays, Father, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, this should be our prayer too. Because the implication of that prayer is that it's not currently being done on earth as it is in heaven. And the more that we align our hearts to his will, the more his will be done here. And the less death we'll see spread throughout our culture, in our communities, in our own hearts even. Ravi was given the opportunity to repent when Lorianne exposed his sin, and he didn't. Don't let this be your story too. Don't be the vessel that God uses for his glory against and in spite of your own will. Conform your will to his, and you'll be more content and more satisfied than you could ever dream of with the plans that you had for yourself. In 1834, English pastor Edward Mote wrote the now famous hymn, which I believe we should all remember today as we close. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. In our modern context, we sing this song as the song Cornerstone, which I think is how we're going to close today. Christ is the cornerstone. He's the solid rock on which we stand. So place your faith in him. To place your faith in anything less is to get less in return. I'm sure many came to faith in Jesus through the miracles of Judas. I'm sure many came to faith through Ravi Zacharias. I know many Israelis were saved by Samson. But in the end, the only leader worthy of honor is our glorious God, who can overcome all the evil in the men that he's using and use it for the good, even weaving our sinful decisions out into a good outcome for his glory and for our good. But I don't want to just leave you on an entirely depressing note. So let's look really quickly at Hebrews chapter 11. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to speak of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, even though Samson died a shameful, miserable death. He is honored as one of the examples of what it means to have faith in the God who called you in the New Testament. Even though he lived a life that was devoid of righteousness before God, he trusted in the God who called him. Even through his failures, he is an example and a warning. An example in that he believed God's call in his life. He knew he was going to be the judge of Israel, and he did judge Israel. He did deliver them from the Philistines. But he's also a warning of what a life lived by doing what is right in my own eyes leads to. I don't know Ravi's eternal destination, but what I do know is that he stands as an example and a warning. An example of God's mercy in offering an opportunity to repent, but an example of what it looks like to have your treasures on earth and to forsake them in heaven. God give you wisdom in discerning which life that you want to live. You can choose one of two paths: the path that leads to life or the path that leads to death. There is no third option, and there is no sitting on the fence. I close with these words of Jesus. Anyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against that house, but it did not fall, because it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it.
Anyone wants to put their hope in Jesus, make him the absolute foundation of their life, this is the time. We welcome you to come forward and come have a seat in a chair. Dave will be down there. Jim and Debbie will be there. We'd love to talk with you, share with you about this hope that you can place your life in his hands. If you feel like you've been following that course of death, get down here. Let's talk about this. Let's have some time of prayer. Let's just see what Jesus wants to do to help bring it back rights again. Rachel, make herself available as well. I know I didn't ask, sorry. But we have lots of people here. Just grab somebody and say, I need Jesus to rectify this way. I need to be on the path of life here. Things have gotten out of hand. And if so, come on forward.